Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March Catalogers training session. We're happy to see everyone. Um, Friendly reminder that if I can't see your first and last name or first name in library, then I likely won't be able to easily give you CE hours. So if you need to change your name, you can go to the participant list, look to the right of your name. There should be a little box with 3 dots. Click on that, and you'll have the option to rename yourself, because I really would like to give CE credit to everybody who's here. I do have a few updates. We will start with share. Let me open this document. There we go. The big thing is coming up on April 4th, is Reaching Forward South in Effingham, and there will be a lot of share and IHLS staff there. And Linda Johnson, if I remember correctly, will be presenting on book repair. So we definitely love to see everyone. And if you attend anything cataloging related, please send me an email and I will give you CE hours for it. The other share updates, for Aspen, most libraries are on Aspen and special libraries are the next group to go live. ePay is still experiencing some functionality issues, but a fix is in progress. Also, last week, there was an indexing issue, which caused titles, both new and old, to not show up. It seems to be fixed now, but if you come across any titles that you're like, why can't I find it? Please shoot me an email or Cassie, and we will take a look at that. Also, Kit and Caboodle, the program is being re-advertised to remind our members of the service. So if your library is starting to collect kits or you have some sitting around and you would like those cataloged for free, but you would have to share them with anybody, we can do that. You can email Jace Cook for more information, and one of us, and probably will be in a couple minutes, will put his email in the chat. Group purchases like the Swake movie license and Library IQ for data collection will be available to join as we enter fiscal year 26. The IHLS newsletter will have more information on these purchases for members to evaluate. The McNaughton program is also available for members. Thank you, Anna and John. Jace's email is now in the chat. The McNaughton program is available for members and provides pre-processed, pre-cataloged popular titles to help members provide the latest titles with ease. Those interested in the program are encouraged to visit the Share website to learn more and sign up. And then lastly, for Share, well, 2 more Share updates. Voting should, if I also remember correctly, will be going live tomorrow. And John, please correct me if I'm wrong. So 1 person per library can vote. Thursday. Thank you.
Thursday morning.
The 13th. 1 person per library can vote, and please vote. There are a couple cataloging related policy and proposals to vote on, so please vote. The last thing is that Dina, Cassie, myself, and then several members from IT will be at a conference in Denver this week. We are leaving tomorrow and we'll be back late Saturday night. So if you need immediate cataloging assistance and it's something you normally come to me about, please send Anna an email. And Anna, if you don't mind dropping your email in the chat, she will be able to do most everything that I normally do. If it is something like you really need to get a hold of me, send me an email and I will be checking as I can. This is a conference related to Polaris. So if you have any questions or you're wondering about certain things, feel free to also send me an email because I will likely chat with them several times. And I will be bringing back hopefully good details about new updates that are coming in the future. Okay, bid standards. We met last week. One of the things is that we have changed the meeting schedule. It is now going to be on the third Friday in February, May, August, and November. So we've moved the meetings forward 1 month. That helps with weather, conferences, summer schedules. So hopefully this will be better for everyone, and it will still be at 10 a.m. We reviewed 15 policies, which completes the policy and procedure review we've been working on all year. Share staff will be updating the website in April with all of these updates and making it cleaner, easier to read. There was also a new acquisitions record retention policy that was brought forward. This will only affect acquisitions libraries. The majority were at the meeting. We've had an issue where we discovered that at least 1 vendor has been reusing invoice numbers. and it caused an issue when trying to bring in two different orders. So we were proposing that the data will be deleted after 5 years. You can see this policy. It should be up on the SHARE website for member comments. So if you're in acquisition libraries, please take a look. And if you have any comments, please leave those. Okay, I think that is everything I have for today. I will turn it over to Pam for a CMC update.
Good morning, everyone. So this Thursday is our next Online with the CMC, so that's at 10 o'clock. If you can't make the live, then we will have a recording and send that out probably next week. So the topic is cataloging equipment, gadgets, gears, and Gallimiphry. Again, that's this Thursday at 10 a.m. For our classes, focus on deriving a record started yesterday in Moodle, and then in April we're going to have cataloging CDs, April 7th through 20th. I'll put that in the chat. We did schedule our FY 2026 classes, so we have things from July of this year through June of next year, and it's basically the same classes we've been teaching, but just look things up in L2. Kat Anderberg, our metadata cataloger, will be presenting on the Mobile Memory Lab at Reaching Forward South, and Eric will be staffing the CMC booth. So please either attend her session, stop by the booth, and get some goodies. And we'll be working on our FY 2026 Online with the CMC webinar topics later this month. So we'll be getting those into L2 probably in early April. So any questions, just let me know. Thanks.
Thanks, Pam. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Anna for a presentation today.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen. All right, let me pull the chat up. There we go. Alrighty. No, let me move, sorry. Let me move this around. Okie dokie. All right, so good morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk about subject and genre headings. This training session will go till 11 today. It is recorded, so if you have to leave before then, that's fine. You can watch the rest of it at your leisure, you know, when the recording is posted. It's a lot of information and I can talk a lot, so if this goes over, we're going to finish the presentation at what would usually be the share your cataloging questions session, and that will be on, I believe, the 25th of March. No, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we do get to that point, and you know, I'm not going to go past 11, so we'll just pause, we'll finish the presentation, and like if there are questions and if people want to see more examples, we can do that then. And normally we don't record those sessions, but if we have more presentation to get through, we will record it, and so then all of it will be available after we're done. Yeah, this one's 2 hours, Susan. So this is one of the 2-hour ones. They're usually only an hour. So yeah, let's dive in because there is a lot to get through. Oh, I meant to mention, sorry. I meant to mention that we gave a lot of these notes and the slides are from a previous presentation that was given a couple of years ago by my colleague Josh. And then Jace Cook, one of the share catalogers, helped me sort of put it together, and he added some slides and some notes. So thanks to them for helping me with this presentation. So what are subject headings? Subject headings are a controlled vocabulary in action, an agreed upon set of terms to help our library users find what they're looking for. In our public access catalog, they allow our users to make connections between materials on a given topic that they may not have captured in their initial searching. It's important for us to always provide high quality, accurate subject headings for our patrons. So to that end, we always want to be as specific as we can with our terminology. So when you're assigning a subject heading, let's say you have a book about cats in front of you. It would technically be true that you could say, this is a book about zoology, you know, in the sense that it's about animals, but that's not really that specific, and it doesn't really make sense that someone looking for a book on cats is going to search for zoology. So that would be a bad subject heading. Not quite as bad as domestic animals. That's a little more specific, but it's still pretty broad. You would want to use the subject heading for cats because your book is about cats. So that would be the most specific one that you could use. Also, if your book talked for a significant portion about kittens, you could have cats and kittens. So it's fine to have like a broader term and a narrower term as subject headings in the same record. But you don't want to go, you aren't being more thorough by adding every possible subject heading to the broadest degree. You want to keep it specific to the book that you're in. You know, a sort of rule of thumb that I use when I'm assigning subject headings is like, would I be annoyed as a library patron if I searched this book, or if I searched for this subject heading and this book came up? Would that be annoying to me? And that's sort of a good shorthand for figuring out if it's a appropriate subject heading for your material. Within a subject heading, it's always going to fall in some 6xx range of the mark fields. You'll see 600 fields for personal names, so like if you have a biography, 610 for corporate names, 650 for topical terms, so like sculpture can be a topic of a book, and then 651 for geographic names, so like Illinois, like if you're talking about the geography of Illinois, you have a book about the geography of Illinois. There's other possible 6xx fields that you could use. There's like meeting names. We don't really, I mean, that might be more relevant for like the CMC or something if they're doing like more niche, like historical stuff. But in general, if you're cataloging books, you know, in that are popular books, you're probably not going to use that very much. So mostly it's those that I mentioned earlier that you're going to have to worry about. There's also the 655 field, which is genre. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. And then for our 650 and 651 fields, so that's topical terms and geographic names, that first indicator is going to be blank. And the second indicator is generally going to be a 0. That shows that you've gotten this from the Library of Congress list of subject headings. So pretty much all of the subject headings that you see will have this 650, first indicator blank, second indicator 0 for just like the topical and geographic subject headings. The subfield A is the main subject heading. And then the rest of these, this subfield X, subfield Z, subfield Y, those are all additional subdivisions that we'll get into more in depth about each of those, what those types are. But the main one is the subfield A. Then you also have your personal and corporate names that you could use as subject headings. Those are going to sort of look like this. They're going to be formatted similarly to like a 700 field or 100 field. So you have this first indicator 0 or first indicator 1. So it's 600 first indicator 1. This talks about how the name is presented. So since this is presented in inverse order, so Collins, comma Michael, that first indicator is 1. And then similarly to the 650 here, the second indicator 0 means that this is taken from the Library of Congress list. Mary says aboutness, what a subject heading is based on, is 20-30% of an item, depending on which Library of Congress webinar you watch. Yeah, so when you're assigning, and I think we talk about this a little later, but it's good to mention now, when you're assigning subject headings, similarly, like you don't want every broader or narrower term, you don't want it to be like, oh, I happened to flip open to a random page and they talked about, you know, they're carving a chair, so I'm going to put chairs as a subject heading. It's like, no, this needs to be what the work is significantly about. So these are examples of these subject headings. Does anyone have any questions about like what any of this means? This subfield D here, all the Collins, Michael subfield D with his birth and death dates, this is like the formatted form of it's the access point for this subject. It's like that's the controlled form that you're supposed to use. So that's why we have this there. And we'll talk about that some more later as well. And you'll know, you won't have to add this like individually, you'll know to add this because that's how the person's access point is formatted in the authority record. So as I mentioned a moment ago, we are going to be covering genre terms, but before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the differences between subject and genre terms. So subject headings convey a given work's like aboutness, in quotes, like aboutness. So whether it's a book about cats, and you could use the subject heading for cats. If it's about California, you could use that. If it's about beekeeping or monster trucks or whatever, like it's what a book is about, not what a book is. You can also have this subfield V. This is a form subdivision, which we'll talk about as well. And that means, so this first one means that this is a book about science and it is fiction. So that would be maybe a book where like they spend a big portion of the story like in a science class, or it's just generally about somebody's like musings on science generally. Did my headphones go out? Okay.
No, you're good.
Okay. Sorry, the sound got weird for a second. If I ever stop talking randomly, please, I haven't died probably, just my headphones are weird. So that would be this first one. So 650, first indicator blank, second indicator 0, science, subfield B, fiction. The second one is a genre term. So this is not what the book is about, it's what the book is. It's an example of science, like the genre of science fiction. So other genre terms could be like graphic novels or action and adventure films or alternative rock if you were cataloging a music CD. So genre terms look like this. They have the second 655, second indicator 7 because they're LCGFT terms, and they look like this. So that differs from the subject terms. Let me look here. So we don't use a genre term as a subject heading in a 650 field. So like this one, so like science fiction, this is also an LCSH heading. So what this one is saying is this book is about science fiction like as a genre. So if you had a book that was talking about, you know, science fiction written in the 19th century and they're talking, you know, the criticism of it, that's what this subject heading would be for. So this is the distinction between these three things. These all looks the same. They all include the words science and fiction, but they all mean different things because this one is about science fiction as a genre. This one, oops, what did I just do? No. Okay. This one is science fiction, so this would be like, you know, I'm blanking on science fiction books. Like Dune or whatever would be science fiction. And then the first one is a book that has the subject of science and is a fiction book. Okie dokie. So now that you hopefully sort of understand like what all the indicators mean, we've made that distinction between subject and genre. How do you search for this stuff in OCLC? And we'll also talk about searching the website, the Library of Congress Authority's website. But how do you search for these in OCLC? How do you know which form to use? How do you know which terms are okay to use? Because we want to we prefer terms from the controlled vocabulary. In order to search, you can do it 3 ways in OCLC. So it's similar to Polaris in that way. There's the drop-down menu, there's the icons, and then there's the function keys. So you can use that magnifying glass with the A icon, that will pull up the search box. Or you can use the drop-down menu. You can go to Authorities, Search, LC Names and Subjects. When you use the drop-down menus, it will always tell you, or usually tell you, the little function key shortcut that you can use. So Shift F2 will bring up all the same search box. And the search box will look like this in OCLC. Under the left column, it says Search For. That's where you're going to type in the thing you want to search for. And then in the drop-down menus on the right, you can sort of scope which grouping you want to search from. So if you have a biography to catalog and you want to use that person's name as a subject heading, you would search under personal names. So let's say that we want to search for Jessica Biel, the actress, because we're going to add her to a record. Maybe she's written an autobiography and we're going to add her name to the record because she is the subject of the work. So when you search for Jessica Biel, I think this is the only one that pops up. At least it was the last time we checked, but maybe not anymore. So you have to go into, once you find the record, like once you go into this authority record, you then have to read the authority record to make sure that it is the correct person that you are looking for. So if, let's say instead of the actress, let's say you're not cataloging an autobiography of Jessica Biel, you have a scientific journal about the way frogs reproduce and she's a scientist. It would not be appropriate to add this subject heading to that record because these are 2 different people. So you have to do a little bit of, looking to make sure that it's the correct person. And this can be, kind of confusing because people can do multiple things in their life. So maybe Jessica Biel stopped being an actress and moved on to her career as a scientist. Probably not, but I have every once in a while you see those records, you're like, oh, this probably isn't the right person. And it's like, no, that's the right person. So you just have to, sometimes you have to go to the internet, you got to do a little digging. You want to make sure that the authority record you're looking at is correct for what you're adding to the record. And sometimes it can be a little confusing for topical subject headings that we're going to talk about in a little bit. You can think, oh, this is the perfect term for my record. And then you look at the scope notes and the authority record, and it's like, only use this term in these specific circumstances. And then you think, oh, never mind, that's not appropriate for, what I'm trying to talk about. So in order to, so let's say she were acting in a movie, if we're familiar with like access points. Down here at the bottom, this 700 field, that's how you would add her as an actor to the movie. But if you wanted to just add her as like a subject of, like if she were writing this autobiography, this top one, the 600 field, that's how you would add her as a subject heading. So hopefully that distinction makes sense to people. So this is the authority record, and it can be added to a record in different ways, but for subject headings, it's this top one. You could also, so for that example, sometimes you'll search for a person and only one thing will pop up, and you'll just determine whether that's an appropriate subject heading or not, if that's the correct person. And if it is, you can add it and then you can move on with your day. If you're like our colleague Linda Johnson, who has a more sort of generic name, a whole bunch of people are going to come up when you search for Linda Johnson. So, in that case, you have to sort of do some digging in this list and see which one is correct. And you might have to click into some different authority records and see which one is appropriate. Just because you get a big list like this, it doesn't mean that one of them is going to be correct. So you don't want to just default to like, oh, I'm tired of looking through these, so I'm just going to like choose a random one. It's like that is not helpful. That is not what you should do. So if you don't want to scroll through this list, You can come back to it later, but you do have to choose you have to select the correct authority record for the term. Otherwise, like the controlling won't work properly, and you will link a random other Linda Johnson to your record. You can also have fictitious characters. So Linda's a real person, but like Donald Duck, for example, is a fictitious character. So when you search Donald Duck, I think it's like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 things come up. I have the little screenshot that I pulled here. So this can be confusing. So this first one, this number 4, is Donald, Duck. So if you were just going fast and you read this, it would be like Donald Duck, and you'd be like, oh, I'm going to add this to my record. But it's like, no, that's someone who's named Duck Donald, and we don't want that if we have a little golden book about Donald Duck. The second one is Duck, Donald, fictitious character. That's the one we're looking for. If you look at the scope notes for that one, that's like the Disney character. And then there's Donald J. Duck and Donald Dunn, who for some reason got pulled into this search. I will say I looked up Donald J. Duck because I was like, man, his parents were real mean naming him Donald Duck. But he, as you can see there, Donald Duck was created in 1934, I think. So he just got right in under the wire in terms of being named Donald Duck. So my condolences to him. I'm sure he had a fun life with people commenting on that all the time. Tracy says, what do you recommend doing if it's difficult to determine if the personal name authority record is the right one? I get a lot of older, obscure authors, so no usable Google searches, and some of the authority records have almost no identifying information in them. So in that case, if you can't find, if there is no authority record for the person, it's fine to just leave their name in there uncontrolled. And that's sort of the best you can do in those situations if you don't have NACO permissions to create an authority record for someone. We do have people on the Share and CMC staff who now we can create authority records for people. So if you're like, I'd really like this person to have an authority record and I can't find them in the list, then you can reach out to us and we can create it for you. But it is possible if you can't find any information, the thing you don't want to do is link it to just like, you're like, I don't know what this is. I'm just going to link it to this one because it seems fine, even though I can't actually tell if this is the correct one. Don't do that. Just leave it uncontrolled and that's fine. Let's see. Mary says, I would look at the other information in the record, look at the 670s, the sources if nothing else is available. If you're unsure, even when looking at those, I wouldn't assume. It's best to leave a name unlinked than link it to the wrong name. Exactly. So yeah, like do as much digging as you can and that you have time for, but don't link to just like a random thing. Hopefully that's helpful. You can also, so if you have that super long list, you can do a browse search or you can do a command line search. You would do scan for the command line search, you do scan and then the little tag, and then you'd put your thing that you're searching for. That will bring up a more, you'll see a screenshot of on the next slide. That will bring up a more specific list that's a little easier to navigate. It'll take you right to what you searched for. So if you are dealing with like a super long name or a super long list for a generic name, that probably is a better option. It looks like that. It'll pull up this kind of list, and you know, that gets you to the heart of the matter a little quicker. Again, just because you have a lot of options or just because that name that you searched pops up doesn't mean that's a good one to use. So in this case, for John Johnson, this is something you might see in authority records for generic names. So I think from my understanding is back in the day, they had these records and just like everyone was on the same record. Like everyone that was named John Johnson was just like linked to the same thing. And then at some point they were like, wait, why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. Like this is not helpful. So they have these, like they call them, I think they're called undifferentiated records. And it will have that field in all caps and be like, do not use this record. So if you see that, don't use that record. Because that is not going to be helpful to anyone. It's not linking it to your specific person. someone has since gone through and unlinked all those people, and you can see that list there. It's like there's a bazillion different versions versions of that name, different people living different lives. So don't just use the first thing you come across. You have to do a little bit of searching in the authority record to make sure it's the right one. Okay, so that's like names, if we were doing an autobiography, general searching. There's also just the topical subject headings. So in this case, you can search for just any topical subject heading. You can search in topicals specifically. I always search by LCSH. I've just always done that. It's a slightly broader pool. I think it includes some like geographic names or like place names than just topicals does. But if you're just searching for a topical subject heading, topicals should work fine. So for example, if you search zombies, it will pull up all these different options. And some of them have these subdivisions, some of them just have the plain ones. And when you go into the authority record for the one that has zombies subfield V fiction, it says this little record generated for validation purposes. Like sometimes they'll have ones that people have used a lot, they'll just generate that. That doesn't mean you can't add any other subdivisions onto it, but that's one of the ones that they've like validated specifically. So this would be something if you had a book like World War Z or whatever, or Warm Bodies, if it were about zombies, that's what you would want to add for this. It's a fictional book about zombies. On the previous slide, there was also, here, I'll go back to it. There was also zombies in literature. And if you have a book about zombies, you might think, oh, this is zombies in literature. So this one is specifically for like, similarly to like science fiction, like history and criticism of science fiction, like zombies in literature is about zombies as they are represented in literature. So if you have that, then you could use that. But if you just have a book that's like The Last of Us novelization or something, you wouldn't want to use that one because you would want to use zombies subfield V fiction instead. Okay. So if you are like overwhelmed by the searching process and you want some more information, there's a link and the PowerPoint should be in L2. You can look at that link and start at the 2-hour point, and there's some more tips and tricks on like searching in OCLC. You do not have to search in OCLC if you don't like that, that interface. You can also just straight up search the authority's website on the libraryofcongress.gov website. So this is what it looks like. There's also the link to it there, and you click search authorities in the center of the page. You can scroll down. So like if we searched for this name, Brown, Bernard D, it'll give you the different options. You can search by name authority headings. And then you would click on, it would bring you to this page, and you would click on that little dude for authorized heading for Bernard D. Brown. And then you'd click on his name again, the link to open the record. And then it gives you this mark coded display. So this is like the authority record that we saw in OCLC. It's like, this is the same information. There's also the labeled display. This is like sort of the pack view of this information. If this is easier for you to read, you could look at this as well. And then you can search for different things. So that's the same, it's pulling from the same database of information. It just depends. I'll go back a slide. If you prefer this, if you don't like the OCLC interface, like that's fine. These are the same thing. You're getting the same information. It's just whatever your personal workflow is, whatever you prefer to do. So let's say instead of a name, we're going to search for a subject heading. Let's search for chickens. So we switched it here to subject authority headings instead of name authority headings. So then it pulls this list up, and you're going to click that top one, that red button for chickens. And then you're going to click on authority record. And then you want to go to the 1XX field, so the heading for chickens. It also gives you this like little list of like other terms that you might use. So that's kind of nice. Like as you're searching authority records, like if you're looking at the broader terms or like similar terms or whatever, it might give you, you know, an idea. It's like, oh, this is specifically about hens. So I could add chickens and hens to this record. And then once you click on chickens for the heading, you'd look in the 150 field. That's the term, that's the controlled term that they want you to use for the record. So if you were adding this to a record, you would use the term chickens. These 450s here that we saw, you see that in the OCLC record, authority record in here. 450 means they don't want you to use that term. Oops, sorry. So they're saying don't add the scientific name for chickens, add the term chickens. And then the 550 field here means like a sort of a wider term. So like poultry is a larger term for this. And then another related term is like egg production. So again, you know, as we talked about at the beginning, you're not being more thorough by like adding everything you possibly can to a record. But if you think, if it's just like, if you have a, let's say a children's juvenile like series about poultry farming, it might be useful to add poultry because like you're sort of talking about chickens as like a livestock animal. So maybe you would think it appropriate to add poultry to that one. But if you're just talking about like, you know, this is a chick, chicks are cute, look how fuzzy it is, and it's like about the color yellow or whatever, it's like it probably wouldn't be appropriate to add the term poultry to that because that's not really what that book is about. Okay, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? We still have more to cover, but anything I've said that is totally crazy, that you've never heard before, that you have a question about? I'm gonna grab a drink. So, all right, we'll move on then. So building subject heading. So now we're going to talk about those subdivisions. Just because there's a lot of like subdivisions that you can add that won't necessarily get pulled up in that OCLC search, but are still appropriate to add depending on what your subject heading is. It allows for more precision. So these are the different types. So we have the subfield V, the form subdivision, the subfield Y, the chronological subdivision, the subfield Z, which is the geographic subdivision, and the subfield X, which is general subdivision. And if you go into the authority record for like a subject heading, like the one we search, if you go into the authority heading, there are different leader fields. Like you can click on it and it will tell you if it's allowed to be like geographically subdivided or chronologically subdivided. So if you're ever like, I don't know if I'm able to add this, it will tell you whether or not you're able to add that in the leader field of the authority record for what you're trying to add to. So first off, we have the form subdivision. This describes the type of work. It's not the same as a genre. It's not as specific. So a genre will be like, you know, alternative histories or something. This is just going to be like fiction or nonfiction. We're not getting too specific here. Typically, if a book is anything other than an adult nonfiction book, it should have some sort of form subdivision listed. And even like adult nonfiction books, like biographies or whatever, those can have subdivisions, form subdivisions as well. Generally, you will see these, almost always you will see these at the end of the heading string. So here we have examples. We have fiction, we have juvenile fiction, juvenile literature, biography, comic books, strips, etc. You know, if you've been cataloging for any length of time, I'm sure you've seen all of these at one point or another. We have a specific section on like juvenile subject headings, but so we'll cover that in a little bit more depth pretty soon. Juvenile literature here does mean like juvenile nonfiction. That's what that stands for. So if you have a fiction book, an adult fiction book, you'd add this fiction, and if you have a juvenile fiction, you'd add juvenile fiction. And if you have juvenile nonfiction, you'd add juvenile literature. Here's some more examples of subfield B form subdivisions that you could add. And it's not an exhaustive list, but just some common ones that you see. You can also add a chronological subdivision. This could be very broad or very precise. So like this first example here is the Easter Uprising in Ireland that lasted 6 days, and then there's the Cretaceous period, which lasted longer than 6 days. So like, you know, huge spans of time can be potentially covered with the chronological subdivision. Donna says, in a juvenile work, do you leave the adult subject headings as well, even if they match? I have seen this different ways. So yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to the to that section. But if for share, like in OCLC, it's not incorrect to have adult subject headings and juvenile subject headings. So you don't want to take them out of the OCLC record, but as a local edit for share, if the adult heading and the juvenile heading is the same, then you take out the juvenile headings. Does that make sense? If it's oh, you're saying in a juvenile work. In the juvenile work, you still use the adult subject headings and you just have the subfield be juvenile fiction. Julia says we use both for young adult. Yeah, I would consider young adult books like juvenile works. So if it was a young adult book, you'd have like emotions, juvenile fiction, or whatever. Chronological subdivision. Okay, we talked about that. There's also the subfield Z, which is geographic subdivision. So this indicates the origin or the locality of the main topic may be used with subjects that vary depending on location. So like, you know, wilderness survival, Rocky Mountains. Obviously, wilderness survival is going to be influenced by where you are in the world. So wilderness survival in, you know, the Florida coast is different than wilderness survival than the Rocky Mountains. So it's important to add that geographic subdivision. Agriculture, France, the Loire River Valley, subway stations, France, Paris is different than subway stations, you know, Russia, St. Petersburg. Let's see if I missed anything with this. Yes. So these can be, these are a little like, you can get pretty granular with stuff that's in the United States or in the UK or in Canada. It's kind of Western centric. So you can get pretty granular with those places. If you have a book about Africa or Asia, you probably can't get quite as granular, unfortunately. If you see you might see two, like multiple headings, like with two subfield Z, one more broad, more specific. I don't think you can have more than two. So you'll never see 3 subfield Zs in the same heading. So you would have this, and it will always go in this order. Like you'll have the broader one first, and then you'll have the more narrow one after it. The exception, so as I said before, it's kind of like Western and US centric. So for something like France, it's just going to be like France and then Paris. But for the US, you don't have to have the United States first. You can just say like Illinois. And that's going to be the case for Canada, the US, and the UK. You can jump straight to Scotland and then get more granular from there. So just one of the fun things about the Library of Congress. So yeah, that can be confusing for people when you're like, okay, do I have to put the US or can I just put Illinois? If it's a US state, you can just put the state and then get more granular from there if you need to. So this, for example, so these examples, this would be a subject heading. So a book about police, specifically in Illinois, that's fiction. So like if you had the Edwardsville Police Department was like the main characters of a book, that would be appropriate. Or subway stations in Glasgow, Scotland, specifically. You can also have just a general subdivision. So it's describing something additional about the work that is not appropriately categorized in other subfields. It's limiting the topic in some way. So remember we searched for zombies. If you had a book that was specifically about like how zombies are depicted like in world religions, you could have zombies religious aspects. Or if you had a book that's about agriculture, but it's specifically about accounting practices in agriculture, you could have agriculture subfield X accounting. So the subfield X can kind of confuse people as well. It should not be used where the subdivision would simply, like if a narrower term is available, like don't just use it to narrow that term, if that makes sense. So you wouldn't want to go art, subfield X, sculpture. Like there is a subject heading for sculpture, so you would just use that one. And then you could use additional, if it was specifically sculpture technique, you could use that subfield X for narrowing that term more. And then they also, in this last example, they have um, specifically in Florence, Italy. So we have that country there because it's not the US, UK, or Canada. We have the country and then the city, and then it's just those two. And then the specific chronological subdivisions. I should mention with all of these are not just like free text. You have to search for this specific wording, especially for like chronological subdivisions. There's like 18th century, 19th century. There's specific subdivisions that you can search for, and you search for those the same way you would search for subject headings. So you would go to that LC search box and you would search by subdivision headings. And if it's not in there, um, then you shouldn't use that term. Sometimes you will have subject headings that are like personal or corporate names, as we talked about how to search for those. You can also like, if this is a biography, so we had that subject heading that we searched for and formatted as a 600, and then you could add this form subdivision for biography. Let's see. There might also be this, you might see this in the authority record. So like if this is how they've formatted Napoleon's name, you might see the subfield C, Emperor of the French. That's just how they've formatted it. This is distinguishing him from other Napoleons. So if you see that subfield C in there in the 1XX field, then, oops, sorry, I keep doing that. Then you would, sorry, I got distracted. Then you would, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Then you would put that in the access point. If you are adding subject headings for a music CD, this is where it can get a little confusing about the distinction between like subject and genre headings. It's kind of an exception to the general subject versus genre heading rule. So for music CDs, you can add rock music, and then you have that chronological subdivision for 2011 to 2020. And that's like a specific, like, again, that's like a specific time period that you have to look up, like that's how that's formatted. And then you would have alternative rock music for, for a genre heading. So you can have both of those. So that's a little bit of an exception to the like, the you're not necessarily cataloging for the themes of the CD, you're just cataloging it as rock music. Same thing with poetry. You'll see another exception to the sort of subject versus genre rule. So like if you have a book that's French poetry from the 21st century, that could go in a 650 rather than a 655. So yeah, these are examples of like different things you might see in poetry. So if you see these in poetry collections or whatever, so this one has a subfield view for collections, you don't have to worry like, oh, this isn't about children's poetry. It is children's poetry. Music and poetry are sort of exceptions to that distinction, if that makes sense. Pam says, name heading for the person. Assign the heading as established in RDA form in the name authority file. Do not subdivide the name by a biography. Exception biography has been established and may be used under the names of 4 individuals. Oh. Okay. I guess don't use that one. You learn something new every day. Okay, juvenile versus adult headings. So when you're searching for subject headings, there might be specific, like if you search for watermelons, you'll see this in square brackets, it says children's in all caps. Those are from the Children's and Young Adults Cataloging Program. That's also run by the Library of Congress, but they're separate from the normal LCSH headings. Those are fine to use, like they're not wrong in an OCLC record. If the term is the same, we don't have the children's subject heading in there as along with the adult subject heading, if that makes sense. But it should be formatted mostly the same. And the second indicator will be 1 for a children's subject heading instead of a 0 to indicate that it came from that children's list. So for share local practice, if you need to add the subject heading for cemeteries, then it's cemeteries, juvenile fiction. You would get rid of this one. So 650, first indicator blank, second indicator 1. So it's a children's heading. Cemeteries, it's just fiction because it's already assumed to be like juvenile. So that one you would delete as a local practice because we already have it covered by cemeteries juvenile fiction. However, if you have subject headings that are different but are still the same subject, then you would keep them. So in this case, you would keep both of those, swine, juvenile literature, and pigs. And it just sort of depends if you're searching through things and you see these and you see one that's distinct from the others, then you would want to keep both of them. If you are using the normal, so if you're using the LCSH for juvenile materials, you'll have juvenile fiction or juvenile literature for pretty much everything, book-wise. If you're doing children's audiobooks, there is a term for juvenile sound recordings. We prefer to use just still like juvenile fiction or juvenile literature. You don't use the form subdivision juvenile sound recordings for that. We do also, this one's a little up in the air, juvenile films. So I think now there's a subfield, there's a form subdivision for juvenile drama. And that's like the film distinction between fiction and nonfiction films. I think the practice historically has been to use juvenile films as the form subdivision for everything. And I think I think the authority record itself was kind of confusing historically, and it made it seem like it was just for plays or something, like kids' plays. But now they've updated it so that it does seem to include juvenile, like fiction films. So that might change at some point in the future. locally. I think right now you're just supposed to use juvenile films. But if you have questions about that, you can ask me. Mary says juvenile films is for nonfiction. Yeah, so I think in the past for Share, they've always used juvenile films for everything. So if you see that, that's why I think in the past it's been like that, but that we'll probably update that. So you can use juvenile drama, but if you're confused, then you know, it's been different at different points in time. If you're using the children's subject heading, so if you have that distinct children's subject heading, you'll just use fiction because you don't have to say juvenile fiction because it's already the children's subject heading. So here are some reminders for various local practices. So you can add a local subject heading. So a local subject heading would be like something that's not in LCSH that we're adding specifically for Share. If you have a name that you want to add as a subject heading and it's not controlled, we don't consider that a local subject heading. It's fine to just not have it controlled. But if you're like, I'm cataloging this Tony figurine, like we have a local subject heading for Tony figurines. So that would be one that you would add to the record as a local edit in order to increase searchability for like that specific thing, if that makes sense. And Mary says juvenile films uses form subdivision. Yeah, so for the juvenile film stuff, like I've had several people email me about it. Like I think they've updated the scope note for it. So now that it seems pretty clear that they want it to be used for nonfiction films for children. So we do need to go through and update that in the Share guidance, but I don't think people are used to doing that. So we'll have to do that at some point this year probably. In order to use a local subject heading, we want it to be from, there's a list on the Share website of local subject headings that you can use. Don't just, local does not mean like just something that came out of your brain that you're adding to the record. Like use something from that list. Generally, if there's a subject heading, if you are looking for something and you're like, I really need this subject heading, and it just like doesn't exist in any place, I'm pretty sure there's a way to suggest subject headings to the library. I've never done that before. You could figure out that process. I think people from the CMC maybe have done that before. So they could maybe walk you through it. But in general, like I haven't come across that situation very often where I'm just like, there's nothing for this. So when you're putting a local subject heading in, there's the 690 field, which is like the totally local subject heading. There's a couple for Share local practices. There's a couple subject terms that we use as genre terms. The big one is like young adult fiction, except I don't think that's what this is talking about. Coded and marked 65X tab with subfield 2 local. Yeah. Did it cut off? Can you hear me now? Am I back now? Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So basically, like, we want terms to come from LC or any of the approved thesauri that we use. If it's available in one of those, like, we're not going to approve a local subject heading for it. Oops. Yeah, and don't add local subject headings to WorldCat or to the main OCLC records because they're specific to share. So we don't need those. And that you can, if you're original cataloging a record, you would do that and then you would add these afterwards. And then we have a list there. There's a couple additions since the last time this presentation was given. So especially for those like sort of niche audio materials. So locally, we also remove certain subject headings. There are the Sears headings. We take those out of the records. They're not, all of these are not wrong, so you don't take them out. Again, this is a local practice. Like we don't take them out of the OCLC record, but we do take them out of our Polaris records. So Sears headings, if there are foreign languages, so there's like a lot of French subject headings in OCLC, we take those out as long as the material is not in French, then you can just take those out. And then anything that's from a thesaurus that's not from one of our approved thesauri, and they're all listed there. So that's like the BISAC headings, you can take those out, FAST headings. For foreign language subject headings, as long as like for like videos and stuff, as long as there's an audio track and like if you have Spanish subject headings and there's an audio track in Spanish, then you should retain those. Or if there's a French language track and there's subject headings in French, you can retain those. But you don't want to retain subject headings in a language that doesn't apply to that work. And you wouldn't want to go through and like add them either. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? I'll wait a couple seconds. Mary says if you are looking at granularity for geographic subdivisions, you can do region. Yeah, sorry, maybe I misspoke there. So for the geographic subdivisions, I wasn't saying like you can't get granular with them, like you can and you should if you have like a specific, region in, Kenya or whatever that you're doing. It's just like they haven't gone through and like broken down the provinces for like every single country in the world, if that makes sense. Like you'll have to for the non-US countries, you'll have to list the country and then the further geographic name. But for the US, you don't have to list United States and then Illinois. You can just start with Illinois, if that makes sense. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I will move on to genre headings. So, let's see. Okay, so you can, again, back to the searching process. So you pull up this search box, you can search by genre, right there. So like, let's say you search for science fiction. You'll get I think you get all of these. So it's a pretty diverse genre. So there's lots of different options. And some of these might apply to the item you're cataloging, some of them might not. You don't want to, we don't want to choose too broad of a term or too narrow of a term. This is where you really want to get into the scope notes in the authority record. Like, for example, in science fiction, like they make a distinction between dystopian fiction and apocalyptic fiction. And if you're not immediately familiar with like which one is appropriate for your record, you'll have to read those scope notes. I think dystopian fiction is like you live in a dystopia. Like that's what, like the Hunger Games or something. I think, well, actually, this is the Hunger Games. So this has both this is a good example. Like, this has both because the Hunger Games world is both a dystopia, and I think it is also like a post-apocalyptic world. So I think that's why they have both of these. But not everything that's apocalyptic fiction is necessarily a dystopia, and not everything that's a dystopia is necessarily like post-apocalyptic, if that makes sense. So you gotta like kind of keep an eye on the scope notes and make sure you're adding things appropriately. So here in these examples, so this is coming from, I think, the Hunger Games record, this little example here. So we have the two 600 fields. We have the two characters, and they're fictitious characters. So that's that subfield C that you can see there. And it's fiction. And this says fiction. I feel like it should say juvenile fiction. But maybe I'm wrong about that. It's about survival. It's about reality television. So that these 650s, these are the subject headings that we just talked about. This is like the aboutness of the work. And then this is an example as a genre of dystopian fiction, science fiction, and apocalyptic fiction. As a share local practice, so a lot of times you'll see this this genre term for novels. As a share local practice, we take that out because it's like too generic to be useful for us. Donna says, for clarification, where exactly are the scope notes? I think I know, but it would be good to be sure. Sure. I'll just show you in OCLC because that will be easier. Uh, okay. Good Lord. So the scope notes, so let's look this up. Okay. I'm logged in. So if we search by genre, apocalyptic fiction, and we go here, there's this 680 field, and it says fiction set in a world or civilization after a catastrophic event. So it's telling you like very specifically in the subfield I like how to use this. Not all of them will have it. You might have to, these 670s, you might have to sort of like sift through some of this information to be like, I think this is what they want me to do. It's nice when they have these because then you can be like, oh, okay, they only want me to use this in this specific circumstance. So after a catastrophic event such as nuclear war, an alien invasion, etc., sometimes also including the period immediately preceding the event. For fiction set in an uncertain future in a society ruled by an ineffectual, corrupt, or oppressive regime, or by aliens, robots, etc., see dystopian fiction. So I think the scope notes for the genre terms are kind of funny because they're like, they can be super specific. I think it was, okay, so let's search for science fiction. So like cyberpunk fiction. So this has a scope note. It says science fiction that depicts the relationship between human beings and the rapid advancement and omnipresence of technology, which leads to a radical change in the social order. So that is super specific. So just because you have like a science fiction book that talks about like AI or computers doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be cyberpunk. So you'll want to look at this scope note and this authority record to determine if this is appropriate to use. Mary says, Library of Congress doesn't like scope notes in a lot of subject headings, unfortunately, but that's why sources are so important. Yeah, so these are like, I think Mary will know more about this than I will, but like, I think these are the sources that they looked at to sort of like create this term. So you'll probably be doing a lot of like reading through this stuff. But especially in the older ones, it'll have the little scope notes, and those are nice.
And Anna, Julia had a couple questions.
Okay. Julia says, should the 600s have juvenile fiction? For the example in the for the Hunger Games one, yeah. I think those, those should have juvenile, and that's pulled from like the OCLC record. So again, just because you see something in an OCLC record, A, doesn't mean that it's correct. I mean, we generally want to assume the competence of other catalogers, but like you do have to like be on your guard, and people make mistakes and there can be weird stuff. So just like be aware of that. And then also like just because something's in an OCLC record doesn't mean we want it as share catalogers in Polaris. So you'll have to make some local edits. And then Julia also says, does this book have a wider adult appeal as well? In terms of like, did they catalog it specifically like that to include the wider adult appeal? I don't think so. I generally, my sort of ethic is like, yeah, because Hunger Games does have a pretty wide appeal. I think it was marketed and is considered like a YA book, like it is for children. So I would catalog it based on that. Same with the Harry Potter series, like that's a kid's book. So even though like many adults enjoy reading it, I would still catalog it as a kid's book. We sort of have to go with what the book is telling us. You know, we can't, it's like, well, I think adults might like this. It's like, well, people are welcome to search for that, but like it still is a kid's book at the end of the day. And yeah, the Twilight series is another example. Like that's a YA book, I'm pretty sure. So it's like I would catalog it as a YA book. And you're using the LCSH heading, you know, it's still searchable, but it's still, I mean, I don't know. There's not like a great answer for that necessarily. Okay, let me go back to presentation. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any other questions about that stuff? From current slide. Okay. Okie dokie. For share, there are certain genre headings that we take out. We take out novels, we take out informational works. We take out a couple others. There's two more. Somebody help me out here. Novels, informational works, fiction, and there's one more really, it's listed on the share website. There's one more like super generic one that we take out locally.
I'll look it up real quick.
Okay. Literature, that's the other one. So fiction, informational works, literature, and novels. Again, if you are doing original cataloging, it is totally fine to add those to a record. They are not incorrect. They are just a genre term that you can use. But for share, we take those out. There's also, so far we've talked about the Library of Congress. These are all like controlled vocabularies from the Library of Congress. For share, we've approved the use of several other thesauri. So there's the genre terms for tabletop games, there's the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, and the Homosaurus. We're sort of like, we've in the past talked about like, it would be really nice to have a specific approved like Spanish language thesaurus. If someone is aware of one that's like really good and is being updated, that would be great. There's a couple that I see in OCLC records that like I will retain for Spanish language materials, but I've never been to one to like add them myself because I don't know if there's any that are like currently super well updated that we could use. And you're fine to use terms from these. We preference terms from like either the LCGFT or the LCSH. And then if you can't find something in those, you can turn to these. So these little tags here at the end, that's what so you do a 655, second indicator 7, and then you'd have the term, and then you'd have subfield 2, whatever the tag is. So we have the LCGFT, that's the main genre terms that we want to use. Then there's the GSAFD. That one has mostly been phased. Oops, sorry, I keep doing that. Has mostly been phased out, but there's a couple that we say you can use for I think there's like Regency fiction that they have or something else. So if you can't
Correct.
find something in there, you could turn to this one to try to find the correct term. You probably won't have to do that very often. Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, that's good for like, that's especially good if you're doing a lot of like realia or like kits or like art objects, that would be useful. Or if you have like a big collection of like photography books or art books. And then you have the Homosaurus. That was Library of Congress is getting better with these. They've added more terms. It used to just be like man-woman relationships, and that was it for like the subject term. But now they've added like queer fiction and like asexual comics, and like they have more granularity there. Um, and then there's the OLAC video game terms. That's if you're cataloging video games, please use that one. It has a lot of good options there that aren't in the Library of Congress. And same for tabletop games. There's that list there. And you would get those, so you won't be able to get those from OCLC by searching OCLC because that OCLC is linked specifically to the Library of Congress options. These you'll have to go to these like externally hosted websites and find them there and then add them into the OCLC record that way. Or if you see those in a record and you're copy cataloging, you can retain those. Those are these ones are fine to retain for share. So we have the LCGFT. I think I have as a handout like the master list of like genre terms that is on L2. I think I downloaded. Hopefully the latest one is up there. And that's what it's. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Anna. One caveat on that genre term list, they for some reason still have not added large print or larger print.
Oh, really?
No. So it's mostly
Boo.
updated. Compare
It's
it
mostly updated.
compared
Yeah,
to the website of OCLC.
large print is one of the ones where so you can use a LCSH term as a genre term. So here we see we have an LCGFT term, so 655, second indicator 7, detective and mystery fiction, LCGFT. In older records especially, but I don't know, I see this a lot. You'll see like 650 detective and mystery stories. Unless your book is about detective and mystery stories, you want to switch it to look like this. You want to switch it to this LCGFT term because it's a genre term, not a subject term. However, there's some, and we did this for, it used to be like large type books. It was a 655, second indicators, first indicator blank, second indicator 0 to indicate that it comes from the LCSH list. And then we had large type books. They now have a term for large print books. So you want to use that instead. But we do that sort of workaround for young adult fiction is the main one. They don't have a genre term for young adult fiction. So we do a 655, second indicator 0, young adult fiction. Or like I've seen it for like some different stuff. You can do that as long as you format it correctly. For the GSAFD, yep, Regency fiction is the main one you'll probably use from this list. Otherwise, pretty much everything I think is available in the LCGFT, so you shouldn't have to worry about this too much. The Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, you could use did I format this correctly? I think so. Okay. You could use a subject term. So if you have a book that's like about a very specific type of photography, then there's also like, let's say you're cataloging a like scrapbook as a part of like a local thing. More likely the CMC would be doing this, but if you're doing this yourself and you want to add like a scrapbook or a memory book, and you look this up in the LCGFT and you're like, there's like not really anything available for this as a genre term, but they do have it in that more specific Getty Art and Architecture thesaurus. So you could add memory books to your record in that case. Oh, then there's the Homosaurus. So this is specifically a thesaurus with a large number of subject and genre headings relating to LGBTQ plus subjects and issues. Should only be used on local records. I've seen this in a lot of OCLC records, so I think you can add it. I don't know. Maybe we're not supposed to, but I've seen them in there in OCLC. So, always do a search in LC first and in OCLC to see if they have that, and they've been adding a lot recently. The main one that you won't see, they don't use this LGBTQ plus term in Library of Congress. So if you want to use that specifically and have that in your record for searchability, you'll have to go to the Homosaurus for that. Mary says there's also a comics and fiction subject funnel through the Library of Congress who's doing a lot of updates to genre terms, so searching might be better than the PDF. Yeah, I generally don't look at the PDF because, yeah, if anything has been updated, you'll see it when you search for it, so. All right, the OLAC video game and video game genre term list. That one will have that, you can see that like OLAC VGGT, that's the little tag for it. So if you want, LC has like, I think it has like computer games and video games, but if you want to be more specific than that, which hopefully you will be, you can use that genre list. And then the genre terms for tabletop games, like cooperative games, it's got that GTTG. It's maintained by the University of North Texas, and yeah, it's got a lot of options too. So there's some links in the policies and procedures to the policies and procedures for share if you want to look at the specific policies. And like Jennifer said at the beginning, that's going to get updated in April. So do people have questions? Oh wow, I really sped through that. Is there anything people want me to like go back and look at? I can show you some. So like, this is what that one looks like. It like has this here. So you can either, like you can download the PDF of this, or if you click this, it will like just pull it up in the browser version and you can look for it. So it functions similarly to, like they've set it up similarly to like the Library of Congress listings. So this 155, they're saying that's the term you use, like abstract games. And you wouldn't use the term abstract strategy games. And then they give you a little scope note here. And it's like, abstract games are often themeless, built on simple design and mechanics. Perfect information games promote one player overtaking opponents, little to no elements of luck, change, or random occurrence. So if you think you have an abstract game on your hands, then that's what you would put. Let's go back. Let me pull up the PDF for this. And it's going to do the weird thing it was doing yesterday where it won't let me open a PDF. Lovely. Okay, I guess I won't pull that one up. Actually, I think I have it saved on my desktop. Let me look here. No, never mind. I won't show you that one. But it's there. Oh, Lord. Well, that link isn't working either. I swear, I just checked all of these. Okay. That's the Homosaurus. So to use this one, you can, where'd the search go? Oh, there we go. So you can search for a, term. So lesbian comics. So I think they have this in the LCSH, so that's probably not a good example, but it gives you the little identifier for it. And then it gives you, yeah, so you'd use that term and then you'd use this HOMOIT tag at the end to indicate where this came from. Or you can click the vocabulary and like see the whole list. For these like additional, I mean, these additional thesauri, like they have a lot of terms that you can use, and not all of them are going to be something that you would even use in a public library catalog necessarily, or a school, you know. A lot of it's like this one was created like for specifically like if you have an art exhibition about, you know, LGBTQ plus artworks. It could be useful for that, or like if you worked at like the Kinsey Institute or something or whatever. But you know, so not everything is gonna, not everything in these, not everything in the Getty site is going to be like useful to you. But there's some, like if you're really having trouble, like before I used to really have trouble cataloging with like finding ways to describe like, you know, non-heterosexual relationships for books, and this was really helpful. And they've gotten, as I said before, they've gotten a little better, but this can still be useful at times. This one, let's show this one. Yeah, so for so for searching this one, like if you searched photography. So yeah, you could like, you know, if they don't have balloon photography and that's specifically what you're trying to add a subject heading for, you could use that one. And it says, note, aerial photography using a camera mounted or held in a hot air balloon or other large balloon traveling in the atmosphere. So like that's pretty specific. So let's see if I get out of this. Let's see if they have balloon photography in here. Nope, I always click the wrong one. Goodbye. Aerial photography. Interesting. So, works created using aerial photography. Works on interpreting aerial photographs are entered under photographic interpretation. Works on handling, maintaining, and indexing aerial photographs in unbound collections are entered under aerial photographs. So it gives you like how you're supposed to use this. So if you were looking for a subject heading on aerial photography, you would have that. If you really wanted to use the phrase balloon photography, this says don't use that. So you'd have to use aerial photography for the LCSH heading. And then you could go, if you're like, no, I really need this to be in there, you could go to the art and architecture thesaurus and add it that way. And then I think if you search photo under genre, yeah, so if you have like a photo book, it's like works illustrated by reproduced or original photographs with or without text in which the essential information is conveyed by the images. So just because a book, this is a good example, like just because a book has photographs in it, you wouldn't want to say it's a photo book unless it is almost entirely images, and that's how you're conveying the majority of the information is through those images. So, yeah. So just because you're like, you know, something seems good at first, you still want to do a little bit of digging and um, get more information. Does anyone have any questions?
Nothing in the chat thus far.
Okay. Let me just like, I'm gonna sift through my notes here and see if there's anything super critical that I missed. Oh, let me show you the subdivision headings. So here we've got the drop down. I think that's so, well, let's go to geographic names. So Illinois. And it gives you all these like places. Or I think I might be totally wrong about this. Might be about to embarrass myself. or you can use these as a subdivision heading. So, and again, like if you're like, I just want Illinois and I don't want to see every single city in Illinois, you could go to a browse search and it'll bring you up to that one, and then you click it, and then you click it again, and that will bring you to specifically for Illinois as a full state, so that you don't have to scroll through every single option. So I'll go through that again since I did that kind of fast. So we have authorities, search, LC names and subjects, or you can hit this icon. And then if you don't like the results from that, if there's too many, this one, you can go to authorities, browse, oops, LC names and subjects, and it brings up this smaller one, and you scope it here, and then it will bring up that like that other list. And then you sort of have to click through to get to what you want. And this shows like all the possible, these are like the controlled, like people have used these enough that they have like that controlled string. So you can see what people have used in the past. And then so it's giving you, to break down this record, like it's giving you all the other ways to like pronounce Illinois in the other languages. They're saying don't use this 151 field. So you would have a 651 in your record for Illinois if you wanted to add that as a subject heading. And you wouldn't use any of these others, even if it's in, another language, if that makes sense. And like this one doesn't have a scope note. There's no 680. It just is giving this information, like this Wikipedia information from 2007 when they created this. It's like presumably or around when they created this, who knows. It's talking about like Illinois as a state, and it's like that's why they created this authority record, to represent Illinois as a state. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a hot second and see if anyone has any thoughts, comments. Mary says, shameless plug, I'll be talking about LCSH, genre, etc. authority records like what Anna has talked about today and breaking them down a bit in May. Yeah, so if you really want to do a deep dive into like what everything in the authority records means, that would be a great opportunity. So I know that was a lot of information. So if you think of questions between now and the cataloging question session in a couple weeks, feel free to come to that. And we probably, since we finished the presentation, we probably won't record it, and you can just feel free to just ask your questions. No fear, no shame, and we'll figure it all out together. Cool. Well, thanks everyone.
Yes, thank you for attending. And even though we are ending a little bit early, everyone will get 2 hours of credit for attending today. Or if you watch it when we put the recording up, probably in a couple weeks. All right, everyone have a wonderful day. And we will see you hopefully on the 25th, if I got the date right. Yes.